Hi there, John Moore here, and I am a shamanic teacher. I live in the state of Maine in the US, in the northeast of the United States. Today I'm going to talk to you about shamanism and drug use. And I'll start by saying that I am not going to judge anybody's use of drugs. I'm going to try to describe the use of plant medicine and psychoactive chemicals from a shamanic perspective, from a relatively logical, scientific perspective. I have a scientific background, not necessarily in medicine, but I'm going to talk to you about some of the dangers of drugs, how shamanism, some forms of shamanism use what we would consider drugs, plant medicine, entheogens, psychedelics, hallucinogens. There's lots of different terms, and I'm going to break it down a little bit. And I'm not here to pass judgment. My personal belief is that consenting adults should be allowed to do whatever they want with their bodies. We should have bodily autonomy, and if that includes putting chemicals and you are able to make free choice about that and informed consent, so be it. But I will also say that I do not, with very limited exception, use drugs when I, in my shamanic practice. The limited exceptions to that are, this is not sponsored by Dunkin' Donuts, coffee, so caffeine. Caffeine is a drug, chocolate, and cacao, chocolate, theobromine, which means food of the gods, which is the genus of the cacao bean, is used shamanically as well. And I've I've participated in cacao ceremony with people who are skilled in leading that, and it's pretty amazing. And cacao is a psychoactive chemical, or contains psychoactive chemicals that are very similar. Like, if not when you eat like a little bit of 10% chocolate that you get from an average candy bar, but when you have like really powerfully prepared cacao that may be mixed with some other things like turmeric and what have you, it has a very, very calming, loving, embracing effect, unless you're allergic, in which case it has a terrible effect. Let's talk about drugs in their uses in shamanism. And I'm going to talk about plant medicine, which is a really broad term, because a lot of what people call plant medicine are actually mushrooms. Mushrooms are not plants scientifically. They are a member of the fungus kingdom. They have their own separate kingdom, like we are members of the animal kingdom biologically. And there are lots of psychoactive fungi, two of which we are very familiar with. One is psilocybin, or magic mushrooms, and one that is called Amanita muscaria, or the Amanita mushroom, which, if you've seen the Smurfs, the mushrooms that they live in are actually psychedelic mushrooms. The red caps with the white dots around them, those are Amanita muscaria mushrooms. I'll also start by saying that one of the reasons why I wanted to talk about the use of drugs in shamanism is I get a lot of questions about it. I get a significant amount of questions about it. People contact me all the time asking me to lead them an ayahuasca ceremony. I'll talk about what ayahuasca is briefly if you don't know what that is, or to lead them through other psychedelic experiences. I don't do that. Again, I don't use those. I don't use those in my ceremony. I don't use those in my practice, so I can't help those people in that way. But there are people using those. I don't judge them. People use what they use, and people do what they do. But I also want to talk about some of the dangers of those things, because I feel like people should make fully informed decisions. When you put something in your body, you should have informed consent about it. That being said, I have no idea what's in this Dunkin' Donuts coffee, other than, I'm assuming it's just coffee beans and water. There's no sugar or creamer or anything in my coffee. So I'm assuming it's just hot water, coffee beans. If they put something else in there, if they put some chemical in here, and there's probably pesticides and all kinds of stuff that's not great in here. But if they specifically added some chemical in here that created an addictive thing that, and I'm aware that caffeine is addictive, or had some other effect on me, I'd be pretty upset about that, because I wouldn't have informed consent. I would not have given my consent to consuming this. I don't know what's in a lot of stuff we consume. Unfortunately, I don't know how much glyphosate is in the sandwich I just ate, which is Roundup. I don't know how much, unless you eat organic, and even then, who knows? But we do our best. We make a best effort. So a lot of shamanic cultures do use different types of psychoactive plants, chemicals. There are even some animal products, combo. I'm not all that familiar with, but comes from poisonous frogs. Very highly toxic and very dangerous, but people use it for shamanic purposes. And so there is actually a theory that religious and symbolic thought came about in humans when they accidentally ate psychedelic mushrooms. There's no way to prove that, because nobody was around taking notes back then, but it is an interesting thought, because modern research is showing that psilocybin and some similar plants, similar chemicals, similar psychoactive chemicals coming out of plant substances, and psilocybin is mushroom again, have an effect on neuroplasticity, which is the way we rewire our brains. And there is a tremendous amount of research going on now, considering it had been illegal for so many years. There's a lot of research going on right now on the healing properties, the use of psychedelics in a therapeutic ways. There's promising results coming out from studies on depression, treatment-resistant depression, and other PTSD, and other things. So yes, there are shamanic cultures that use these things. There's peyote, which is a cactus. There's psilocybin, which I've talked about, which is mushrooms, and most people are familiar with because it became popular in hippie culture. There's also LSD, which is synthetic, but it was synthesized from ergot, which is a fungus that grows on barley and wheat. I believe it grows on grain, and was actually purposefully used by the Greeks at the Temple of Eleusis for almost 2,000 years to induce altered states of consciousness, to put people through initiations and rites that I would consider shamanic. So ergot has been used for a long time. Ergot's extremely toxic. Don't go out and take ergot, please. The Greeks that were using ergot knew how to brew it into a type of beer where they removed the toxic chemicals. How they knew that is anybody's guess, but they were probably inspired by spirit and got information from spirit to know how to do that. But that went on for almost 2,000 years before Christianity came in and stamped it out, destroyed the temples, burned the books, persecuted the pagans, that sort of thing. But I won't go off on a diatribe about Christianity. If you are Christian, I support you and your beliefs. Historically, though, the Romans, who forced Christianity on everybody at the point of a sword, were merciless and terrible human beings that did that committed genocide and horrible atrocities. And we don't deny that. But that is nothing. I'm not pointing the finger at anybody who's practicing or believing in Christianity today. This is just a historical thing that people in the past did. Let me get back on track. So lots of cultures use these things. Ayahuasca has become really popular, and that comes from the Amazon basin. The indigenous cultures there use that to induce, an altered state. We might call it gnosis or shamanic. It's debatable whether we would call that a shamanic journey, but it is a very powerful chemical. It's also, or set of chemicals, because it includes more than one chemical, but it is a purgative, meaning it makes you throw up and have diarrhea severely, and maybe that's part of the medicine. But that has become popular in the United States. People are importing it. People are holding their own ceremonies here. I think there's an inherent danger there, and I'm going to talk about that in a bit. There's also as I referenced before, the Amanita muscaria mushroom, which is used, found all over the world. used a lot in Northern Europe, particularly among the Sami people in the indigenous people in Scandinavia. Their shamans would actually feed these mushrooms to the reindeer. And I'm going to do a whole video on why Santa Claus was a shaman at some point, but they would feed it to the reindeer. The reindeer would fly or get high. They would capture the reindeer urine in buckets and drink the reindeer urine, and would get have, it sounds gross, but would have a entheogenic experience. Now, entheogen is a term when we use psychedelics for ritualistic spiritual purposes. The word comes from Greek. Theo comes from, where we get theocracy and all of that. It means God, and entheogen means something that generates or creates an experience of God or divinity. So when we use psychedelics, or when people use psychedelics for spiritual purposes, sometimes we call them entheogens. So anything that creates a hallucinogenic state or creates a state of gnosis can be an entheogen. Caffeine's probably not an entheogen. I've never had enough caffeine for it to work that way for me. But it does help keep me awake while I'm journeying. So that is, there's that. So they feed these mushrooms to the reindeer. They drink the urine. Then they urinate and capture the urine and pass the cup around to people who then drink their urine. I know from my cultural perspective, that seems really gross. Drinking urine is not sound like a pleasant thing or something that most people would enjoy. But it is shown that the psychoactive chemicals in the Amanita muscaria can pass through, I think, about 5 cycles of urine. So if people drank the urine of people, like 5 times, there would be enough chemicals for people to experience the state. The red and white kind of corresponds also to the colors that Santa Claus wears and the colors that the shamans wear. And so I'll do a whole video on why Santa Claus is a shaman at some point. And so this, these are used all over the place. However, so in Africa they use iboga, and lots of different places there are lots of different chemicals used, but that it would make one believe, because it's very sensationalized to use drugs, that this is the majority of shamanic practice, and that's not true. It's not even it's not all that common. While it's there are psychedelics used all over the world, most shamanic cultures use rhythm, dancing, or extremities like extreme pain or vision questing or that sort of thing to facilitate the correct shamanic state rather than using chemicals. Now, here's my take. When I journey, my preferred way of journeying is to use rhythm. So I use either a drum or a rattle, or I might listen to a recording of somebody drumming or rattling. And I have full control over what I'm doing. I can, if I'm having an experience that I don't want, I can come back from it anytime I choose. If I'm in the middle of a journey and my house catches on fire, I can come back, stop the journey, and escape the fire. If you take a hallucinogen, we'll say psilocybin, okay? Let's say you take a magic mushroom and you go on a trip. Your journey, you take enough that you're having a hallucinatory experience. If you have a bad experience, or if you want to end, or your house catches on fire, or the UPS guy shows up at your door, there's nothing you can do about it. Nothing. You're on the trip for, I think I've never done it, but I've heard about 6 hours, and I'm sure the experience probably waxes and wanes and that sort of thing. But for many hours, you're going to be under the influence of this, and you can't stop it, and there's no antidote. There's nothing you can take to stop it. Same thing with ayahuasca, probably the same thing with just about anything that you take. somebody that I spoke to that has done almost every psychedelic that one could think of. I was discussing this very matter with him, and he said, once you buy the ticket, you're taking the ride. There's no stepping off. It's like strapping yourself to a rocket with no steering and sending it off. For some people, that's okay. Again, there's no judgment on my part if that is an okay thing for you to do. But for me, I'm a little bit of a control freak, and I want to have the ability to end the journey whenever I feel necessary or whenever I want to. The other thing is, it's not necessary. With enough training, I think anybody can journey and journey effectively. We all have that capacity. We all have the same human capacity to do these things effectively and to get the healing from it. So there's a very recent research article that came out, literally within the past couple of weeks. And it was a really large study. They took about 500 shamanic practitioners and they strapped them into EEGs and measured brain waves and all kinds of stuff. And they also used for reference people who were under the influence of psilocybin. And what they found was that the shamanic practitioners who were drumming created very similar brain state to people who were on psilocybin. There were some differences, but minor. So I'm able to create the same state of consciousness with drumming, but I'm also able to end it anytime I want. Let's talk a little bit about the dangers. Before I do that, so again, this study points to the fact that these chemicals aren't necessary. You can do the same thing, but it takes a little bit of learning. But one thing we tend to do in the West is we want shortcuts to everything. We want to go take a drink, have an experience, and become a shaman overnight. And it just doesn't work that way. You can do 100 ceremonies and, it's not going to change you unless you do the work. You've got to put the work in. And yes, if you go and visit with somebody who's very experienced and knows what they're doing and can guide you through the experience, it can be extremely healing. And you could spend time with them training to run the same ceremonies, do the same ceremonies. But that's going to be, your tool, and it's fine. As a tool, it's totally fine. And very effective, and there's lots of positives that come out of this. But now I want to go to a little bit of the dangers of doing these things. So some of these chemicals are extremely toxic. Combo is one that's very toxic. I don't know much about it, but it is poison. And, so the dosage would be extremely important there. And so if you don't know what you're doing, it'd probably be a really bad idea to experiment with it. It can cause, trouble breathing, lump in the throat, that sort of thing. Ayahuasca. Lots of people are trying ayahuasca. It's become this trendy drug. Lots of people from Wall Street are going down to Ecuador and doing it, or people are doing it in the US. All of these things. I can tell you that my teacher in shamanism, who is a fantastic practitioner and has a full schedule of clients that she works with, has told me that she has at the time, this was a year or so ago, 6 clients who came to her who went to Ecuador, Peru, wherever they went to, did ayahuasca ceremony, and came back and were institutionalized in a psychiatric hospital. I have seen a documentary in which somebody doing ayahuasca ceremony died. There are also stories about people going down to, to do ayahuasca, traveling to do ayahuasca, and getting sexually assaulted, getting robbed. All of these things are happening because they're not in control of their faculties. So ayahuasca, I think, is fairly dangerous and needs to be treated very seriously. It is not a recreational drug. It should not be treated as such. I think that's a really bad idea. I also think taking it out of context, taking it away from people who have lived with this brew for hundreds, if not thousands, of generations, I think there is risk there as well, just from lack of experience in administering and dosage and preparation and all of those things. And when you drink it, I mean, who knows? You don't know what's in it. It could be, lots of things go in there. Includes an MAOI inhibitor, so that can interact with other drugs that might be in your system. And it acts on serotonin, so it can cause serotonin syndrome if you have, you can get too much serotonin, which, if you are on antidepressants or anything that acts on serotonin, that can be certainly problematic. So ayahuasca is something I'm really wary of, just because I've seen a lot of bad experiences and those aren't really put out there. Like, come have a healing ceremony with us. Come do ayahuasca. We'll lead you through this beautiful ceremony, and you don't see the dark, seedy side. It's also become big business. There's now ayahuasca tourism, and whenever the big business gets involved with certain things, sometimes it gets away from, sometimes greed steps in. Again, I've seen a documentary where now they're selling like ayahuasca in bottles in the market, and that just, obviously you should not be doing ayahuasca without direct supervision of a trained shaman who knows what to look for and could potentially call an ambulance if you were in very serious, in very dire straits. But yeah, I know of people who have died, and I know of people who have been institutionalized from doing ayahuasca. Let me get back to, again, I had a conversation with a gentleman who had done all kinds of psychedelics, ayahuasca, psilocybin, LSD, all kinds of stuff. This person came to a talk I was giving on shamanism, and when he walked in, I kind of reeled back. He had almost permanently dilated pupils. His eyes were darting around the room. It looked, so using, sort of other senses, it looked like there were little, almost insects buzzing around his head, and I could hear buzzing whenever he was near. And so, he came in and he was talking to me and wasn't making eye contact. And, he was cogent and he was a really nice person. But he'd kind of blown open the doors of perception and wasn't able to come back and really ground himself. And so I think this is somebody who has done too much stuff in some quest for spiritual learning, or, some instant or, rapid spiritual development. But what he doesn't realize is he's not really living in this world. He's kind of messed up the circuitry upstairs, and probably pulled in some spiritual beings that, have taken advantage of the situation. And, perhaps somebody could work with him to take care of some of that. But, that obviously wasn't happening. And this person was probably continuing to do what he was doing until who knows what. And I've seen this with other things, where other people doing practices in unsafe ways and that sort of thing, where they kind of are lost a little bit, very dissociated all the time. Again, it's, imagine if you were living in a state where there were like insects circling around your head and buzzing really loud all the time. You'd be distracted, you would be out of your body, disoriented, dissociated, all of these things. So there are dangers to these things. Amanita muscaria is considered a toxic mushroom. One of the reasons why they drink reindeer urine is because there's a chemical process that happens with the reindeer that gives you sort of the pure hallucinogen without all of the really nasty toxic side effects from just doing the mushroom itself. But again, when we look at dangers of things, I recently looked at a study that was published in Forbes that was had rated a number of drugs by level of danger, and it included things like danger to health, hospitalizations. So, were people hospitalized from taking this drug? Danger to society, like what's the cost to society of people doing these things? Like, there's a huge cost currently to the opioid epidemic that was, created by the pharmaceutical industry, by very unscrupulous pharmaceutical industry practices. So, so looking at this chart, the very top of the chart, so number one, the most dangerous drug, more dangerous than crack and heroin, by these measures, by these economic factors and health factors and danger to society and danger to the family unit, all these things, alcohol. Number one, very dangerous. Drunk driving deaths, alcohol poisoning, young people getting alcohol poisoning, fetal alcohol syndrome. The cost to society of the use of alcohol is huge, but it is, in the vast majority of places in the world, fully legal. Regulated, but fully legal. Below that are the things you might imagine. So, cocaine and heroin and, all kinds of stuff way at the bottom of the list. And they granted they didn't rate every drug in the world, but we'll say there were 38 items on the list. That's an estimate. There may have been more or slightly less, but it was around that. Less than 40, more than 12. At the very bottom of the list was psilocybin. Psilocybin, as far as I know, there have been no overdose deaths recorded. Very little cost to society. People aren't usually under the influence of psilocybin when they're driving. I think that would be incredibly dangerous if you were to do that. Anything that alters your perception significantly like that would be really dangerous. And it appears to be relatively safe. So when we talk about dangerousness, you cannot tell by the law in most countries. Psilocybin's illegal in most places. You can't tell by the law or by the schedule of drugs. So in the United States, we have drug schedules, and we say that marijuana is as dangerous as heroin based on some, the DEA, somebody decided that marijuana. Well, when we look at the war on drugs in the United States, first of all, it has cost so much money, but it has caused, in every scientific measure of the war on drugs in the United States, it has caused many, many more problems than it has solved. It is responsible, in my opinion, for the extreme violence we see in areas that are producing drugs, because it has made drug use so profitable by forcing it into the black market. Things like marijuana, which are now starting to become legal in states in the United States, provided Mexican drug cartels with 30% of their income, which is money that is being spent on military grade weapons and hit squads, killing people and all kinds of stuff. The incarceration rate for drugs in the United States is huge. The U.S. has more people, more people incarcerated than China, than anybody else in the world, and frequently for non-violent drug charges. So the war on drugs has, in my opinion, done more damage to the fabric of our society than the drugs probably have. And there are much better models of handling that. We see in other countries that actually reduce the use of drugs without locking up a quarter of our population. So you cannot tell the dangerousness of drugs by looking at their legality, because alcohol, the most dangerous drug in the United States, is legal, regulated but legal, and psilocybin and marijuana, at least on the federal level, illegal and rated as the most dangerous drugs, amongst the most dangerous drugs in the world, according to our experts in drugs. So it's I won't go into the whole political nature of it, but there's a lot of politics involved. There's a lot of racism involved in the way that our drug laws were formed. There is all kinds of really bad stuff underneath. We outlawed hemp, which doesn't contain any drugs, for a really long time, and because of that, we cut down forests to print paper because we didn't have hemp paper anymore, which had a terrible environmental impact. So when we write laws in this country, or in many countries, we don't look at the logic of things. We look at emotions, we look at money, how we can make money, how we can be racist, continue to be racist. All these things are taken into account, but not your health and safety. So you have to be responsible for your health and safety. You have to look having a couple of drinks after work. Is that okay for you? I'm not saying yes or no. You have to look at that. So in shamanism, my personal take is the use of drugs, plant medicines, funguses, what have you, poison frogs, not necessary for the work, not necessary for the healing to happen. That being said, if it's something you choose to do it with somebody who's experienced, do it in the correct cultural context, do it with full awareness of the safety issues of what you're doing, prepare, plan for what could happen, plan for what might happen, take a risk management perspective, benefits, risks, and risk is the chance, includes the chance that something might happen, right, compared to the danger. So the risk of, say, psilocybin is very low. There's a very low chance that you could die from it or have serious side effects. But the risk of ayahuasca is pretty high. I'm not sure the percentage-wise, but the damage that can be done is death, is bodily death. So the use of drugs is not universal in shamanism. It isn't even as common as many people think it is. It is used in cultures all over the world. It has been used safely by cultures for millennia. When people take it out of context and abuse it, then it can become unsafe. It's not necessary for shamanic practice. You can learn to journey. I've been extremely successful in teaching people how to journey. I, along with others, have developed a method for teaching journeying both rapidly and in a way that people have a significant amount of success. So it's close to 100% of people have success the first time, and most people who, really, really slim amount of people who don't have success the first time, I can usually get them there, the second or the third time, which is a big improvement over time in the method that I've been teaching. Other teachers might be more successful than I am, but this is something that I've worked on. Other teachers have worked on how to teach this for audiences living in, I almost hate to say modern cultures, but in cultures that are separated from indigenous cultures and don't have haven't grown up in shamanic cultures. We've found ways to very successfully teach journeying that don't involve entheogens or hallucinogens. So again, I hope this has been helpful. I hope you stay happy, safe, healthy. Please subscribe to my channel. I have a lot more material coming. There's a lot of material there, but there's a lot more coming. And I do promise that before Christmas, I'm going to do a video on why Santa Claus is a shaman.